You know, in my home office, I work right by a window and my hand does get cold.
Oh, we're old.
What makes you request when we set the agenda or when we consider the consent agenda?
I think when we set the agenda, you can do it if you want. I'm just gonna say we're gonna move these two things. Just take care of it.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Bill's full of P. Bill's full of P and V tonight. He's gonna be. You did? Yeah.
On the phone?
No, just now. I just said, hey, play with me on this. He's like, yeah.
He called me after you did again, and
He thinks he found a loop.
he wanted to scan a copy of the ordinance.
I like the conversation. I'm achieving, trying to achieve. If he thinks he can get more on, I'll be a cheerleader for him where you can sit there.
Here,
Big history contest.
Call the meeting to order. Will the clerk please note those in attendance?
All will be noted.
Thank you. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. We'll jump into item 2, approval of the minutes. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the regular city council meeting on February 28, 2023.
Move to approve.
A motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Discussion. Mr. Mayor, I would just like
Yes,
to
indeed.
credit our city clerk for compiling the minutes. There was some whiteboards, like 3 of them needed, and you put it all down in roughly 2 pages. Good job. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved.
Abstain.
One abstention. Moving on to adoption of the agenda, we have 2 changes. Item 4B, resolution approving business license renewals, will now become 8B. And we're also going to move item 4I, resolution approving a logo copyright agreement, down to new business, so that'll become item 8C. Are there any other amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. Motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have an agenda. Moving on to item 4, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda as amended.
So moved. Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda is approved. Item 5, visitors and presentations. We have nothing scheduled. Item 6, public hearings. First reading of an ordinance amending the 2023 fee schedule. This is Ms. Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Tonight is a first reading and a public hearing of an amendment to the 2023 fee schedule. On February 28th, the City Council approved an ordinance to permit sidewalk cafes. The approved ordinance allows that fees be established in the city's fee schedule for sidewalk cafe permit application, permit renewal, and administrative penalties. So in your staff report is a proposed the proposed amendments to the fee schedule. For administrative offenses, for the permit violations, staff does recommend a $100 fine. For the sidewalk permit initial application, we recommend an application fee of $150. For renewal of the application with significant changes, we recommend a renewal fee of $125, and a renewal application with no changes, $60. So tonight, the City Council will hold a public hearing and the first reading, and the second reading and consideration for adoption will be at the March 28th City Council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. Council, do we want to discuss this at all at this stage, or wait until the second reading? All right. This will be held over. We've had a first reading.
In the public-
No, public meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is a public hearing. I will now open it up for a public hearing. Going once, going twice. I'll close the public hearing. Now we're done. All right.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I was going to wait for the public meeting to make a comment, so.
Okay.
And I don't know, obviously, we get to talk about this in a few weeks when we have this back, but just, I think I said this at the last time, so I'll just get it on the record. I don't mind the original fee. I'm not in favor. I think after that, I think the fee could be zero, so I'll be leaning in that direction, possibly amending, moving to amend, so just as a heads up.
Very
I think
good.
once we get it established, and if it's year after year and it's simple, I don't think we need to charge these guys $60 a year for the privilege of doing business on a sidewalk.
Anyone else on the council have a thought on this before we move on? All right. We're sure now. We're good?
To be, I don't really count, Mayor. So just to be clear, based on this, staff is going to bring back the same ordinance for the second reading.
Yes.
Okay.
I think the thought being to put a button on this, if we need to make amendments, this isn't a long, complicated
Right.
ordinance. We can make it on the fly and amend it, and I'm sure there will be some thoughts on that, but we'll reserve that until the next meeting. Okay. Regardless of what anyone has to say, I am going to move on. So, item 7, unfinished business. We have nothing scheduled. Item 8A, Minnesota Public Employee Association labor agreement. Mr. Juba, is this you?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mayor and council members. If we could go back to that last item for just a moment. Sorry, not funny.
Sorry, I missed that. Good one.
Wow.
City staff and the patrol union have reached an agreement on their renewed union contract, and we have that in front of you for approval tonight. If you recall, we had 2 other labor union agreements on the last council agenda, which were approved, and this one is very similar to both of those. So for the patrol contract, we have a 2-year duration. Just hit the highlights here. Health insurance premiums will be held at the same contribution levels for 2023 as they were in 2022, and will reopen in 2024. Uniform allowance goes up both years of the contract, and this is for items such as belts, holsters, their winter gear, rain gear, items such as that. And these amounts in their contract for those items match what was approved for the sergeant's contract at the last meeting. And then wages are, once again, from the classification and compensation study that was approved in September. We had kind of a reset for all of our contracts that we've been negotiating through here. And the structure for the patrol contract is very similar to what you saw at your last meeting. In 2023, on 1/1, they'll receive a 3% cost of living increase, and then on 7/1/2023, they'll move into a new wage scale, which is within the parameters of that classification and compensation study. And then in 2024, backing up to 2023, significant change for this contract with that change to the new wage scale is there's no more longevity and education pay. That's a big part of the current contract, and it's now factored into the structure of the wage scale. So then in 2024, back to more normal business, we have a 3% cost of living adjustment on 1/1, and then employees will move through their steps on their employment anniversary dates. And then the field training pay is, this matches the sergeant's contract, but that is now moved to 1 hour of overtime pay per shift where patrol members are assigned as field training officers. And with that, we recommend approval of the 2-year contract with the patrol officers.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Juba. I'll extend my compliments. I know negotiating these contracts are laborious and time-consuming, and it sounds like we got a resolution that both parties are happy with, so good job with that.
Thank you, Mayor.
So, council, we have a resolution before us. We have comments or questions for Mr. Juba? Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, Mr. Juba, how do you think this compares to other police officers' pay in the region? Are we competitive, or are we?
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Hughes. Yes, that was part of going through the classification compensation study, was identifying where we thought that range was competitive, and we feel like the range that we landed at here is competitive within our region.
I just feel like our police officers do a really good job, and I want to make sure that we're paying them.
Anyone else on the council? I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, the resolution passes. Good job again, Mr. Juba. All right, moving on to item 8B, approval of business license renewal. Who's taking this? Ms.
I'll
Crawford.
take this. Mayor, members of the council, tonight you will be reviewing and hopefully renewing various annual business and liquor license for the business cycle April 1, 2023 through March 31, 2024. So the city's municipal code requires that certain business activities in the city be licensed and comply with terms of the license or ordinance. Licenses have a one-year term expiring on March 31. The attached resolution categorizes by license type. It's a lengthy resolution, so bear with me here. I'm going to go through it a little bit. No licenses will be issued until all required paperwork has been submitted through, including insurance, fees, fire inspection, corrections have been implemented. Just want to go through some of the following businesses that have closed and will not be renewing their license for this upcoming year. The Stadium Bar and Grill, JJ's Beer Stube, and Birch Lake Liquor, and White Bear Amstar. King City applied to renew their on-sale liquor license, but will not be renewing their Sunday liquor license. Pagoda Restaurant and the Waters have decided to no longer offer liquor beverages. And various massage therapists did not renew their license and are no longer working in the city of White Bear Lake. And those establishments include Vita Day Spa, Family First Chiropractic and Wellness Center, Walker Blue Balance Wellness, and Sun Bear Salon and Spa. Holohan's Pub was not responsive to the city's attempts to contact them regarding their business license renewal and required fire inspection. Therefore, staff did not include them in the recommendation for renewal. Keys Cafe has applied for an on-sale wine license. This will be a new liquor license for the existing establishment and is also included in your resolution. MGM Wine and Spirits has taken over the property, has taken over the property previously owned by C&C Wine and Spirits. So their license is in your packet for approval. However, that license will not occur until mid-April or May. So we are also renewing the existing license for just a couple of months into the new year. And that was provided to you by the city clerk at the dais here. There are new owners taking over Washington Square Bar and Grill and are currently undergoing the background check. Staff does recommend approval of the establishment's renewal and will issue the renewed license upon clearance from the police department regarding that background check. When we go into tobacco compliance checks, they were conducted at 24 licensed establishments in June of 2022 for educational purposes. And that opportunity allowed staff to conduct one-on-one education with local, state, and federal laws around youth access with tobacco retailers. The goal was to educate retailers about the important role they play in keeping young people tobacco-free. 6 establishments did fail that compliance check, and they are Speedway, North Oaks Holiday, White Bear Bait, MGM Liquor Warehouse, Freedom Value, and Speedway. 2 Speedways, I should say. None of the establishments were issued citations for failures during the educational compliance checks. A second background compliance check was conducted in the fall of 2022, and there were no failures during that check. At the City Council meeting on September 27th, 2022, a moratorium was adopted to prohibit the sale of THC products for a 12-month term while the city conducts a study to consider the development and adoption of appropriate local regulations. While that moratorium has been in effect, the police department has conducted compliance checks on the prohibited sale of THC products. First round of those compliance checks was conducted in November of 2022. There were 5 tobacco licensed establishments that failed that first compliance check. They are Convenience and Tobacco, E-Cig Smoke Shop, Firehouse E-Cig Shop, M&J Tobacco, and Nothing But Hemp. A second round of compliance checks was completed at the beginning of March 2023, just a few weeks ago, regarding the sale of THC. At this time, 2 establishments did fail that second round, and they are again repeat offenders, M&J Tobacco and Nothing But Hemp. When we talk about alcohol compliance checks, the police department conducted those checks in March 2022 and October 2022. 3 establishments failed the first compliance check, each of which has been issued an administrative citation, and they are Carboni's Pizzeria, Brickhouse Food and Drink, and the Burger Bar. Follow-up was conducted with each license holder to ensure a procedure is in place for verifying the age of purchasers and to educate the business on potential consequences for a failed compliance check. There were no failures during the second compliance check, and I think that's important to note. When we go into police calls for service, calls for concern are those calls in which a person or persons experience behavioral changes due to alcohol consumption. These calls include disorderly conduct, lewd behavior, fights, intoxication leading to medical responses, and intoxicated driving incidents, particularly when the recorded alcohol content is 0.16 or greater. When there is a pattern of these calls for concern, police administration contacts management to provide education and guidance on the incident and to limit similar incidents in the future. As in years past, the police department offers alcohol and gambling enforcement division server training to liquor license holder staff. While there has been a decrease in calls for service since COVID-19, we certainly do continue to see calls for service of concern recently over this past weekend. That's not in the city council packet, but I do want to call note to that. Many of the city's liquor establishments continue to close between 10 p.m. and midnight, which is also good, but there are a few establishments that do remain open until 2 a.m. And some of those, actually all those businesses are required to receive a different license. It's been discovered that one of those establishments does not currently have that license, so we are working with the state on that one, and it will be followed up with the business owner. When we talk about fire marshal inspections, the fire marshal conducted initial fire and life safety inspections on all liquor license applicants and renewals. The fire marshal is working with a few of the businesses on safety modifications and will conduct follow-up inspections to ensure compliance with the state fire code. Issuance of licenses will be contingent upon final inspection and successful correction of noted violations upon reinspection, and a corrective action plan shall be in place no later than March 31, 2023. So we'll stand for questions at this time. You do have a resolution for approval of liquor license renewals as well as a couple of new ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. So there's one thing in particular that I want to call attention to and have a couple of questions on. So let me just make sure I have the facts straight. We have some tobacco shops that failed the compliance check on one occasion, and then the second time they passed. So in other words, they corrected their mistake with regard to the sale of tobacco. And then we had some liquor establishments that failed, 3 in particular, but then they corrected their mistake, and then on second compliance check, everything was good. Okay. Now, I also see that there are 5 tobacco shops that also sell illegally certain THC products, and 5 of those failed the compliance check. But unlike in tobacco and unlike in alcohol, they continue to be out of compliance. They failed a second time. So this is a question for Ms. Crawford or perhaps our city attorney. Is there any ongoing criminal case associated with those violations? What is the status of those? Please.
Mr. Mayor and council, as you all know, I'm not the city prosecutor, so I'm not directly involved in those decisions. But as I understand, there is a criminal case being pursued against those who were found to have been selling THC products in violation of your moratorium. So as I understand it, there are ongoing, but with the backlog, I understand it's anticipated to take several months to reach any sort of conclusion on it.
Okay. So then my question becomes, and I'm sure others on the council will want to weigh in, we don't have a licensing structure to sell THC products. We do for tobacco, but we do have a moratorium. Does one relate to the other? In other words, can a violation in another area be cause to not issue a tobacco license, for example? How do those two interrelate?
So, Mr. Mayor and council, typically when you look at a particular type of license, the sorts of things that you traditionally look at to determine whether or not a business has committed a breach or a violation, usually you're focused on things related to the licensed business. So tobacco license, has there been a violation associated with the sale of tobacco? In this particular case, your statute, your code does talk about a basis of denial for a license when it comes to tobacco licenses. Again, they are focused primarily on activities associated with the sale of tobacco. I will note the statute, the code does specifically say the following list is not exhaustive or exclusive. So it does seem to suggest that the council has some discretion beyond the listed 7 items in the code.
Okay.
So not a direct tie. Arguably, there is some discretion with the council to consider that. Staff did approach me with that question, and really, from my perspective, it wasn't a call for me to make, frankly, to say yes because of a THC violation or frankly some other violation. That's one thing you have to be a little bit cautious of. How far away from the business activity do you go? If there's a building code violation, if there's some other code violation, does that then affect the business license?
Okay. And certainly well, you correct me if I'm wrong, if a conviction were to result from the outcome of that criminal case, that would potentially have some additional bearing on whether or not we grant this or other licenses for that property, correct?
Mr. Mayor, I think that certainly makes a stronger case.
Okay. Okay. And that, as we have said, is kind of tied up in the criminal courts, and unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that at this time. So, anyone else on the council have something? Councilmember Walsh?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll pick up where you left off. The code for licensure, I'm looking at it right now, 1104.040, basis for denial of a license. There are 7 items, as the city attorney mentioned. Number 5 on that list, the applicant or licensee, this would be a reason not to renew a license, license holder has outstanding fines, penalties, charges, or property taxes owed to the city. So I guess my more specific question is, that I assume that it's a misdemeanor penalty, right? They've been charged with a misdemeanor. The most likely adjudications would be to pay a fine, whatever the fine is, and it's happened twice with these 2 businesses. So I guess my question is am I accurate? Have they been charged with a misdemeanor?
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, yes, as I understand it, that typically is a penalty for violating the ordinance, and having drafted the moratorium, it specifically indicates a violation as a misdemeanor.
Yeah. So I guess my point is, I think we do have we have some discretion here on the decision on these 2 licenses for tobacco. Yes, these are THC violations. They're not related to tobacco, and this is a tobacco license. The only reason it's a tobacco license, we haven't done the THC license yet, which is kind of the point. We passed a moratorium for a year until we could get our work done on a THC license structure. Also waiting for the legislature to see if they come back and fix the law that they passed. Looks like there's a lot of movement on this topic at the Capitol, but it's very fluid. We have no idea what's going to come out of this session, which is why we did the moratorium for a year. We were that was good. So in the meantime, we've got 2 businesses that are, I think, flaunting the moratorium. And And I look at the statute, the license is an agreement between the city, the taxpayers, the residents, and the business to operate in the business. And yes, the license is very specific on tobacco and the products you're going to sell, who you're going to sell to. But it's also, are you a business in good standing in the city? Are you following the rules? And I think this item 5 on this list kind of speaks to that. Yes, among all the other things we're going to specifically license you for, are you following the rules generally? And as we look forward, if we're going to adopt a THC licensing structure, these two businesses want to work in this town, have their businesses in this town, presumably follow this new THC licensure structure, which they'll probably be able to. What does it say about their future compliance? And so I'm ready today to strike these two businesses from the tobacco list for approval of their licenses tonight. And I think we have the grounds to do it. I think that item 5, outstanding fines, penalties, charges, or property taxes owed to the city. And I don't know what result would come from the 2 violations that aren't misdemeanor fines at the very least. Why would we not at least fine them? I don't understand, court proceeding notwithstanding. We're not going to bargain. We're not going to plea. We're not going to, the statute is the statute. They failed the compliance check. At the minimum, it's going to be a misdemeanor penalty that they have to pay. And I think they're considering it a cost of doing business. Well, we'll just pay the fine and keep selling. And it's, what's a $1,000 fine? I don't know what it is, but it's probably not more than that. So cost of doing business, no problem. But I feel like it's a business not in good standing, and I think the statute is written that allows us to say, no, you're not going to continue giving you a license today to continue being a business in the town to sell tobacco with these violations. So we can discuss it more, but at some point I would move to strike these two businesses, the M&J Tobacco and Nothing But Hemp, from the list of tobacco licensees. But maybe it's not right for that motion yet, but listen more to the discussion.
Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Questions for the city attorney. I have 2. I'll follow your lead, Mayor, as to. So the first one, I don't have the ordinance in front of us, but as you were reading the section that talked about charges, all of the other language in there talks about monetary charges, not legal charges. So fees, fines, unpaid taxes, charges to me struck me as I was listening to it as in the context of a financial charge, not a legal charge. I'm curious, Mr. City Attorney, if you could provide any interpretation guidance, or I guess I can't expect you to know what case law says on that, but I'm at least I'm not fundamentally disagreeing with the idea that businesses who are not in good standing should be allowed to continue functioning in flagrant, but to the best of my knowledge, they haven't been found guilty. They have been charged, but they haven't been found guilty, and I'm not clear that that language actually applies in this situation. So a question of interpretation. And then I've got one other one after that.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, my reading of this is, when you read it as a whole, outstanding fines, penalties, charges, or property taxes owed to the city. I really typically do read that as charges imposed by the city, special assessments, fines, penalties associated with failure to pay within a certain time. You're subject to a penalty of a certain amount, that sort of thing. So, and I read that because it's owed to the city. Typically, and again, I'm not a criminal attorney at all, but typically when there's a criminal charge, the fine is owed to the court. You may get a portion of that through the system, but really it's a payment to the court, not directly to the city. So I think this really was meant to be more focused on charges imposed specifically by the city rather than through a criminal charge focus. I will point out, not to try to, because I do think you do have some discretion. Again, this is not an exhaustive or exclusive list. So since I'm talking, if you don't mind, just add one other. If the council is inclined to want to look hard at these two businesses and whether or not to consider whether to renew their tobacco license, what I would recommend, just to make that as a defensible process as possible, that if that's where a majority of the council is at, that rather than acting specifically on that tonight, it would be a motion to continue consideration of those two to the next meeting for consideration of denial. And then we'd give notice to the businesses, and so they would have an opportunity to be heard at the next meeting before you would act on that. And that frankly would also give staff an opportunity to prepare a resolution supporting a denial if that's where you choose to go after a hearing. So I think that would procedurally be a more defensible process than acting definitively tonight, if you're inclined to want to consider further whether or not denial might be appropriate.
Can I continue, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
So, working with that recommendation, which on its face seems reasonable to me, I do find it curious that you work with city councils many places, and you say you don't work with criminals? Never mind. So,
Crickets on that.
what opportunities do we have, what requirements do we have to give notice of our intent to use this modest degree of discretion? And inside of that, your recommendation for that we continue the discussion, notice the businesses, is there in practice, case law, anywhere in statute that says we need to provide an opportunity for amendment of ways that, that they missed two? Do we have to give them a third chance? Are we able to act immediately without having given notice that this is our interpretation of the statute, or excuse me, the ordinance? What does that need to look like in order to have a legitimate due process?
Sure. Mr. Mayor and council, as far as notice goes, if in fact the council acts to continue consideration of these two licenses to the next meeting, I would encourage staff to soon, starting tomorrow or shortly thereafter, give notice to the business that that's what's the council is considering, and that there would be a hearing held at the next meeting, and you would have an opportunity to speak to this. So they would have that opportunity. No, as far as 3 strikes, 4 strikes, 5 strikes, frankly, the fact that they've had 2 strikes, I think in my mind that's plenty of notice that they are clearly acting. And frankly, as the council knows, there's been communications with at least one of the business's attorneys, knowing very well what the city's position is on this.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jones.
Mr. City Attorney, could you please read the ordinance?
That line specifically?
That in the preamble before it?
Sure. So in section 1104.040, it's titled Basis for Denial of a License. The following shall be grounds for denying the issuance of or renewal of a license under this section. The following list is not exhaustive or exclusive. And then number 5 is, the applicant or license holder has outstanding fines, penalties, charges, or property taxes owed to the city.
Thank you. I think at least if we walked away from tonight with a suspension of the license at minimum, we temporarily suspend the license until we find action, whether we table this to say we're not going to issue them a license. That's what I would want minimum out of this. There is no argument that they failed. Both those businesses failed the compliance check, first and second, on the tobacco. They want to use a loophole to continuing to sell THC because the state passed a bad law and everybody else has to catch up. I'm going to use a loophole on something that says it's not exhaustive or exclusive, giving me the wiggle room, discretion as one vote. So at minimum, I would move to, bearing further conversation, to say at least minimum, we suspend it until we table it. Tabling it, I have no problem. Moving it to the next meeting, I think that's giving them too much. They've already had that. Other businesses do their job, and this is why I'm mad. Other businesses in our community do everything they can that are doing tobacco and alcohol in compliance. They work hard, they train their employees, they do the right thing. And to my knowledge, these two have not. They have thumbed their nose at our community, at our city council, and I could care less about me. I'm more worried about our community. They're like, we're going to sell it anyways because the state says. Well, I know at least one business that was here that said they were going to close down, and then this law miraculously got passed. Sat there right at that podium. We were going to pull out of White Bear because this business wasn't going well for us. And then magically THC comes out of nowhere and number 9, we can go. Great. Well, not very good legislation done, and we have to deal with it as well as other cities. And we could have taken one of probably 3 routes. We chose to regulate, not just pass the buck and let anybody sell THC next door who could be living to you next door in the city of White Bear could have done it. We said, no, we don't want that. We want to take a moratorium. We want to regulate that. At least that was the important part to me, that this could not be just sold anywhere and everywhere in the city of White Bear Lake. That's why we did this to folks that are listening. And it really peeves me off, especially the folks that, you know, if you're selling tobacco, that's your big thing. If you're selling alcohol, that's a big thing. And it's hard, and it's tough on the employees. And it's already tough on employees through this last couple of years. We need to back, I think, the businesses that are doing what they say to do. So I would certainly move to suspend their licenses until, if we choose to table, or what action we do at minimum tonight.
So just one follow-up to that. First of all, I agree with everything you just said in the spirit of it. My concern with what you just said with suspension is the point of tabling it or continuing it to the next meeting is so that we can do a little more due diligence to make sure that we're not creating exposure for the city, and I think that's an important thing to look at. I want to make sure I have my timelines correct on this. My understanding is these renewals would go into effect April 1. Is that correct?
Mayor, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. My point being that we will have enough time, we will have another city council meeting before these licenses would go into effect. So whatever direction we decided to take, that would give us enough time to bring it back to this body and give the city attorney and others a chance to do a little more research on that. Mr. Gilchrist.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor and Council, just to follow up on that point, your section in the tobacco license, the section that speaks to revocation or suspension, talks about any license under this ordinance may be revoked or suspended by the city council for violation of the provision of this chapter if the licensee has been given reasonable notice and an opportunity to be heard. So that would lead me to recommend you not take a suspension action tonight. And if you want to move this forward, continue those 2 items to next, then we have the notice, giving them opportunity to be heard, and then you would have both options before you at the next, well, 3 options: renew, suspend, or deny, or not renew.
All right.
Okay. And I want to echo something Councilmember Jones said, because this makes me exceptionally mad. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 full pages, top to bottom, of a list of all these businesses in White Bear, ranging from those that sell alcohol, to tobacco, to charitable gambling, to refuse haulers, that all seem to be able to comply with the law, which is what I think we all want. That's how we have a civilized society. Except M&J Tobacco and Nothing But Hemp, who has openly flouted the law and have had 2 violations. So I would very much support continuing this to the next meeting and seeing what we can do, where our legal standing is, and then this council can make an informed decision after we have a more robust memo and research on this. Anything else as to what we've just talked about? Because I have another issue. Councilmember Walsh.
Well, I'm prepared to make a motion if you want to do another, if you want to do something else first.
There was one other thing that I needed clarification on. This question is for Ms. Crawford. I don't recall which establishment it was, so I didn't follow. We have I think someone selling alcohol, I don't know if it was on sale or it would have to be on sale, that doesn't have the proper state license to go until 2 in the morning. Do I have that correct? Can you help me understand what the issue was with that license?
Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. Our ordinance allows operation until 2 a.m. That establishment, whoever they may be, must get permission in order to operate that long. We have 3 that are in operation that long with a proper license. We have a 4th establishment that is operating until 2 a.m. without that proper sign-off from the city clerk. That establishment is a White Bear Bar. Now, that was discovered today after a police incident over the weekend, quite frankly. And we are looking into that, but that is the establishment.
So it's not a proper license under the city? This is a state licensing issue?
It is in correlation with the city code that allows them to be open until 2 a.m. We do have to sign off on that and get that to the state.
Okay. So I guess my question is, it's just for exposure for the city. Are we within our code and within state law, do we have the ability to authorize this license today? That's my question. Because I don't want us to be running afoul of what state law requires.
Mayor, you do have the authority to approve a renewal of a license right now. We are looking into those extended hours, and I don't have a good answer for you right now.
Okay.
We have time if you wish to table this item for us to do some further research. We did follow up with the state today, but that will take a little while.
Well, I want to throw it out there because it sounds like this is a relatively recent revelation, and my only public policy goal is that we get this right, and it's now been called into question. So if we have time to maneuver, does the council want to consider that? Councilmember Hughes.
As we all know, I'm not a parliamentarian, but are we just tabling the entire bit, or are we pulling out a couple of things? And if we're tabling the entire thing, then wouldn't that be part of it?
I think what's before us right now, and there's no motion yet, but I think we're contemplating just continuing the MNJ tobacco and nothing but hemp. So it's a long way of saying, no, we're going to approve everything else except those 2. So if there's other things that we want to take a second look at, now's the time to do it.
And also ringing the bell for White Bear Bar, 2 a.m. Doesn't affect their business.
The only reason I'm saying we should entertain that is if we still have time to get that figured out prior to. I'm not trying to stop anyone from doing what they're currently doing. I just want to make sure we're conducting our due diligence to make sure that we're dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's. I wouldn't be saying that right now if it was an instance where an establishment couldn't operate, but we have a whole nother meeting before this renewal goes into effect, so they'll continue to operate under their existing license. So, but it's up to the council. But that, my ears perked up when I heard that, and I want to make sure we're following the letter of the law.
Well, Mr. Mayor, then, I guess I'm still a little confused on the White Bear Bar issue. Is you asked the city manager a question, but I didn't quite understand. Is it something that the staff can clear up, or does the staff requesting, should we take it off? I mean, is it something that can handle administratively before April 1 and we don't have to worry about it? I'm not that concerned about it. It sounds like something that you guys can get in compliance with between the state and the city, and if that's the case, then we don't have to do anything, in my opinion, on it.
I believe it is an administrative, truthfully, I have not looked into this deeply, so I'm giving you my best guess answer.
Okay. Well, having said that, Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval of the resolution how do I do this? Move approval of the resolution striking MNJ Tobacco, nothing but hemp from the tobacco list, continuing them until our next meeting. We can approve those 2 at the next meeting. I appreciate the city attorney's advice on that. I believe in notice and transparency, and I was actually half of mine as I was driving here tonight thinking we should call these guys and tell them we're doing this because it really affects their business. So I will say as it relates to our ability to do this, I appreciate Member Edberg on the outstanding fines, penalties, charges, property taxes owed to the city. It just, in my mind, it's a matter of time before there's going to be a fine owed to the city. I mean, there's just only one way this is going to go. And I don't have to wait for that. Honestly, I don't need to wait for that as a council member to make this decision. So if that's not even happening in 2 weeks, I'll be ready to move forward at our discretion, using that, or you're just using the idea that they're not a business in good standing in the city of White Bear Lake. So, but I do think continuing those two, moving the rest of it, including the White Bear Bar for now, is the right motion. And then we get some proper notice out and get a hearing, and then and we can make a decision in 2 weeks. So,
Okay. Mr. Gilchrist, are you satisfied with that motion, or should we move to amend the language? I'll defer to you.
Mr. Mayor, I believe the motion is clear enough. For a
Very
second.
good. All right. I have a motion to pass the resolution as written with the exception of M&N Tobacco and Nothing But Hemp, which will be continued to next meeting pending further research from staff. Do I have a second for that?
Second.
Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. And the resolution passes in relevant part. All right, item 8C, resolution approving the logo copyright agreement. Ms. Crawford.
Mayor, members of the council, so the city council will consider adopting a resolution that authorizes the mayor and myself to execute a transfer copyright agreement for Bear logo drawings. Dan Jones, a White Bear Lake resident and city council member, created a collection of Bear drawings for the city to use in various formats. The collection of Bear drawings have become a popular and recognizable staple in the city. Branding and can be spotted throughout the city, including being centered as in its emblem, displayed on street and sidewalk signs, embroidered on city staff apparel, and the biggest bear painted on the water tower located just off of 35E. So staff requested to enter into a transfer of copyright agreement that would transfer all rights and copyrights of the bear drawings from Jones to the city. That agreement is what I am requesting the city council approve with this resolution. The city agrees that the drawings will be used as part of city-related business only and will be able to seek trademark protection for its logos that contain the bear drawings. So.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. I'll just note for the record that Councilmember Jones is not receiving any monetary compensation for this, that he's effectively donating his fine art to the city for our benefit, and we thank him for that. Anything else on this, council? Councilmember Engstrand.
Does this include the green ones over 35?
Mr. Mayor, even though I'm abstaining from this, no, the green bears were not included in.
I would entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
I move approval.
Second it, Mr. Mayor, and I had a bunch of questions for the applicant. I can't find them in my notes here. But if you just bear with me, I have several things. Maybe you could go to the podium and we could ask you some. No.
I'll pepper you for questions. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. The motion carries, the resolution passes. All right, moving on to item 9, discussion. 9A, concept plan review for 2502 County Road E.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, as you've just introduced here, this item is a concept plan review and discussion for the property at 2502 County Road E. This is the first item that's come through under our recently adopted ordinance for concept plan review. So staff is going to provide a little bit more of a presentation than we normally would, just for the benefit of continuing education of the public and anyone who's watching or listening to the presentation. But staff will try to be brief, because really the whole idea behind this process is to let the council, the planning commission, and the public talk about the proposal that an applicant is, the concept proposal that an applicant is bringing forward. But to provide some structure for that conversation, we created this process, and I'll try to provide a little background related to that. And then staff will stand back, answer procedural questions, and let the council have a conversation with the community and the potential applicant here. So, just by way of background, again, the applicant in this case is Element Design Build. The property, as we've talked about, is at 2502 County Road E. It is the vacant Petro wash station. They are proposing in their concept to redevelop this property into 18 residential units, 15 of which would be in an apartment building and 3 would be in townhomes next to that apartment building. Again, to just stress here, this is a concept plan review. There's no recommendation from staff, and there is no approval or denial of the project at this stage. We are simply discussing this proposal and getting feedback. The neighborhood meeting that was part of this process occurred back on February 23rd, and there's a summary of the information from that in your packet. Planning Commission reviewed this at their February 27, 2003 meeting, or just a few weeks ago, and again, information about that is in your packet. I'll give you a brief summary of those two things in here in just a couple of slides, and of course, tonight is the City Council review. And as I mentioned, there's no, this is the typical spot where there would be a recommendation from staff, and there is none in this case. So the current site, again, 2502 County Road E, southeast corner of County Road E in Bel Air. Just by way of size and referencing people, it's nearly 7/10 of an acre. It was a gas station from city records from at least 1971. The existing building appears to have been constructed or at least rehabbed in 1985. But vacant since at least 2009, where water service records show that water service had stopped the property. And the fuel, city records also show that the fuel tanks related to the gas station were removed back in 2016. The concept plan is summarized here on this slide for you, but the applicant plans to speak after me and provide a much more detailed discussion, and I'll try to let him cover most of that information for you. But again, as we mentioned, 15-unit apartment building located generally on the northern portion of the site. The ground level is predominantly interior parking. The building does have 3 stories at the northeast corner or closest to the intersection, and then pairs down to 2 stories as it transitions to the east along County Road E. And then next to that, just to the south of the building or in the southwest corner, is where the applicant's concept plan includes 3 townhome units. Those are 2 stories and include 2-stall attached garage. Overall, the parking on the site includes 32 total units, 21 of which are enclosed in either the ground floor of the building or the attached garages for the townhomes, and then 11 surface parking stalls. Again, here's the renderings that are included in your packet for you, and the applicant will give you much more detail about their design concept when they come up. There is a brief section that provides some analysis structure for the council's and the planning commission's conversation. The future land use category of the property is designated as mixed use. That does allow apartment buildings and townhome type uses and densities in the range of 16 to 34 units an acre. Based on the 0.67 of an acre, that would allow a total range of 10 to 22 units on the site. In trying to find a match in our zoning, that generally lines up well with the R6 medium density residential category, and we anticipate that the applicant would, in a formal application, include a rezoning to that category. In that category, presuming we're in that category, there is a 35-foot maximum height. The apartments are currently at 39.5 feet, and the townhomes at 29 feet. Setbacks in that R2 district, again, just to give you some context, 30 feet on the front street side on corner lots, and the rear lot, and the 15-foot setback on the interior side, or the side that's shared with a neighbor interior to the site. It exceeds the interior setback at 25 feet, but doesn't meet the front or street side setbacks. And that is intentional in the design of the applicant, and he'll give you a lot more background as to why they chose that design. By looking at the parking standards, generally our code would require 2 stalls per unit for buildings like this. So at 18 total units, that would be 36 total stalls. Again, the applicant is at, the concept currently is at 32 total stalls. Again, 21 interior, 11 surface. And then also does have a proposal that they would assign 1 stall per bedroom, which would leave 6 stalls open as available for guest parking. And again, the applicant will give you much more detail about their proposal with that. Exterior of the building generally, again, it's just kind of concept in general at this point. Stone base with fiber cement siding and panels on both types of buildings. Neighborhood meeting, again, I mentioned occurred on the 2nd of February. Notification in our ordinance talks about a 300-foot notification. But again, we looked at it from a kind of a contiguous area around the direct neighbors of this site. So this map shows you that general area. And again, at the farthest reaches, north and south here, going down these contiguous blocks, we reached out to about 1,100 feet. So, but we felt that that was the contiguous neighborhood of this site. And the residents we are trying to reach at this point of a concept plan discussion. There were 22 people in attendance at that meeting. Again, there's a summary of that in your packet and a sign-in sheet. Some support was voiced at that meeting, but most had concerns, including the number of units, the height of the building, the parking, stormwater storage, snow storage on the site, and access off of Jansen Avenue to the south. Other comments that were received after that meeting were from general phone calls to staff of people who didn't choose to identify themselves or their addresses. One just spoke generally as opposed to the site, and then 2 who looked at the proposal and commented that it was generally consistent with the comp plan designation, and appreciated the concept plan review process, but didn't specifically have an opinion supporting or opposing the project. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission looked at this back on their meeting on February 27th that occurred here at City Hall. That's not technically a public hearing, but we are encouraging people to comment at that meeting. So in that time, there were 8 people that provided comments during that. There's a summary of that in your packet in your staff report. Generally, 5 were opposed to it for similar reasons that are listed here on this slide as they were voiced at the neighborhood meeting. 3 generally supported it. In supporting it, they talked, those people talked about the quality of the design in their words, the communication from the developer throughout this process, the need for investment in the neighborhood and in this particular corner, and the more specifically the step-down design that they're proposing from going from 3 stories and trying to transition more closer to 2 to match the neighborhood adjacent to it. Potential review process here, again, for you, this concept plan review process that we've been talking about, but should they move forward, if generally a PUD process would allow them to get approval for the 2 different types of uses, the townhomes and the apartments under the PUD. If they chose to make any of, make some of the townhome units, for example, for sale, and they needed to have individual lots under them, there would be a subdivision review, but that's to be determined at this point. But there would need to be a rezoning, again, from the current B3 auto-oriented business to the R6 medium-density residential category. The PUD process to allow for any deviations from that zoning, the rezoning that would occur, and then Ramsey County Watershed would be looking at the property for stormwater management. And then just generally as a reminder to the council, the idea of doing the plan unit development allows us, we try to get it to a zoning category that best fits the project. But if there are some deviations that still need to be made, the PUD allows the council to, or the city to approve some deviations or some flexibility from those standards, assuming that the community then gets a higher quality development. So the applicant's expected to detail what additional things above and beyond our process and our standards they would want to provide to a particular project. So there were some questions about height, so I just wanted to highlight for you the applicant's profile view of the building here. You see on the left-hand side, you see the apartment building showing a midpoint, measurement to the midpoint of that peak of that building at 39 feet, basically 6 inches. And then the townhome building again to the midpoint of their peak at 28.11 or 29 feet, which was mentioned in your packet. There were also some questions about density, so just to try and give you some ideas about this as we go through this discussion. The neighborhood mixed use future land use category, as I mentioned, allows apartments and townhomes in a density range of 16 to 34 units an acre. And based on the lot size, that translates into a total of 10 to 22 units. So what this graphic tries to show you is some general proportionality of what that might look like. It's obviously we're not standing out in the real world, but the proportion and size of the lots are similar, and then the size of the buildings are supposed to be proportional to the densities that would occur at those levels. And if you look at the right-hand side of this slide, you can see 18 units an acre and what that generally kind of looks like. And just above that, then in the top row would be 35 units an acre. And those aren't exactly the 16 and 34, but I'm trying to give you a context for discussion. And then I wanted to give you a couple of examples of height and density throughout the community that are similar. So if you look at this, this is the Cedar 8 townhome project that's at 1795 Cedar Avenue. So just to the east of Cedar and 61, basically. There's 8 units on this property, and it's nearly half an acre, so a little bit smaller and fewer units, but the densities generally work out then to be the same. And that comes out to 16 units an acre, okay? In this case, it's 22 feet high to the midpoint of the peak, approximately based on staff's measurement. And then to give you another example kind of on the other end, at the 36 units per acre, if you look at the Arbors of White Bear at 4800 Division, there's 80 units on 2.2 basically acres. And that comes out to 36 units an acre, which is similar to the higher end of the range that we're talking about here. So what I would suggest for the council is that this is, again, kind of a context providing graphic, and that the size of the property, the height of the building, and the number of units all are variables that kind of play into the density and the physical bulk of what a site looks like. So, you know, I would offer that in this particular, in either of these cases, there's fewer units on the first one on a smaller piece of property, so it looks less, while it has a similar density to the lower end of the spectrum for this development, it probably looks less dense than the applicant's proposal. If you look at the high end, where we have, you know, a 3-story building that has 80 units associated with it, it would, I would argue, look more dense than the applicant's proposal, but still has basically the same density range that we're talking about. So just again, for some context for the council, and we have our discussion tonight. So, and then my last slide here, before we move on to the developers, talks about next steps. Again, reminder, there's no formal action here. Staff suggests that the council just takes any public comment and feedback that would occur tonight, and again, shares that with both from the public and the council, and shares that with the developer. To, again, provide some context for the discussion, and I think would help guide staff and the developer as we would move forward here. Generally, these 5 questions I think would be helpful. Does the council generally support or oppose the concept plan? Would the council generally support rezoning to the suggested R6 medium-density residential category? Would the council generally support the use of a planned unit development to allow any necessary deviations that may be part of the concept? The specific things we talked about tonight are setback, height, and parking. Should the council generally, number 4 here, support the use of the PUD? Are there specific things that you would be interested in asking the developer to go above and beyond with? And there's a generalized list of some things you could consider in your staff report, and we can talk about those if you have questions. And then if you just generally have a preference, this isn't a zoning standard, but some feedback for the developer. Is there a general preference between rental and ownership, or some breakdown of those 2 things with a particular project? So with that, I'd stand for questions, but the next step in the kind of the presentation tonight would be to hear from the developer. And I have a set of slides that I can run through as he's talking for him. So thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we hear from the developer?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Ryan McKilligan. I'm a project manager and the founder of Element Design Build. We're a small infill development and construction team based here in the Twin Cities, and we initially found this lot during the County Road E Corridor Action Plan. The city was engaging in that process and getting a lot of community feedback on what should be built here throughout the whole corridor, and with this intersection being one of those key parts of the corridor redevelopment. So our main takeaway and sort of the reason we became interested was the idea that we were going to have a chance to basically hear and get all this community feedback going into this process. It's been our experience on properties that we've previously developed and tried to get approved that this dialogue with the community ultimately, albeit with some tense moments during the process, leads to a better outcome in terms of what we build and what the community ends up with. And so we got the sense that there was a healthy dialogue, healthy input from community members, and that we could come up with something that was ultimately going to be far better than what currently exists there at 2502 County Road E. So the corridor action plan ran its course. We attended 3 different meetings, got to hear from a lot of different folks. During that process, we knocked on a lot of doors, had coffee with a lot of local business owners, got to meet parents of kids that go to school in the area, got to meet all different kinds of folks in that neighborhood, and tried to start to get a sense of what are going to be the main things that we need to address in this development and in this proposal. The first and the one that came up with almost every single person we talked to was parking. So we knew going into this that we would have to adequately address parking, not only just to try to eventually get approval, but also to try to make this a development that's good for this neighborhood, and creates a suitable parking situation for passersby, the neighbors themselves, the tenants, and local businesses as well. The appropriate number of units was also a key theme as we started to talk to people. And like Jason laid out, future land use designates this to be somewhere between 10 and 22 units. So, as we try to figure out how we're going to get parking for at least 10 units, and try to build something that makes sense and that works for the community with that minimum threshold, there's kind of a careful path that we as a developer are trying to find to get the right number of units, because reasonably from the neighbors, they'd probably prefer it to be less, but local business owners also in a way, benefit from having more units there. So we're trying to strike the right balance within that future land use designation to try to figure out something that works. And then the third was basically long-term responsible management of the property. So people wanting to know that this obviously is on a prominent corner there on County Road E. People wanting, one, to know that the parking was going to be managed, and two, to know that the property as a whole was going to be maintained and continue to be a feature and a strong residential anchor for this intersection for years to come. So what I'm going to do is lay out kind of what we've designed and why, and I want to highlight a couple of things that I think really help to frame this discussion and frame the nature of this site. The first of which being the difference in context between the northwest corner and the southeast corner of this site. If you find yourself standing at the northwest corner of this site, which would be right there at the intersection of County Road E and Bel Air, you're in a place where you're surrounded by local businesses. You're on the intersection of two busy streets. In that context, the building and the community benefits from high density that creates basically foot traffic, walkability, activation of the streetscape. If you find yourself, however, at the southeast corner of this lot, you're in a residential neighborhood where people want peace, quiet, low traffic. They don't want a tall building. So we consider it our responsibility to try to find a design in a way that can justify those two different contexts within this design while still adding to the intersection and the vibrance of that area. The other kind of contextual thing just to keep in mind, you know, we've talked to neighbors a lot, and throughout the corridor action plan process, speaking with neighbors, and then also looking at current zoning and future zoning, there's a lot of different stakes to be held on this property, and there's a lot of different interests that we're trying to navigate. So we don't expect that we're going to be able to reconcile all those different interests, but we do believe that ultimately we can come up with something that's beneficial for the neighborhood and aligns with the city's process for land use approval. One thing that I wanted to kind of help define as we're having this conversation as well, and that I realized we didn't really maybe make too obvious for people during the neighborhood meeting and the planning commission, but when we use the term activation of the streetscape, what we're attempting to do there is basically take the elements of the building that are going to contribute to a sense of community and let those face the intersection, face Bel Air and face County Road E. So as we talk about the actual future PUD or approval process and the things that we're going to ask for in terms of deviations from R6 medium density residential, what we're trying to contribute in exchange for that as a way to get to the neighborhood mixed use density level is adding a lot of basically features at the ground floor that face the street that activate the streetscape. And that being a major tenant or a major outcome of the corridor action plan too, in hearing the voices of neighbors and local residents that wanted something. They wanted walkability, sense of community, and a building that contributed to a sense of place there. So just to quick orient you to the building and what we're proposing. Starting there, this is the view towards the east from Bel Air. So about, it's basically the backside of Beanco, roughly. So on the north end, the large white and black building, you've got 2 stories of apartments above a ground floor that's amenity space and parking garage. So in between the townhome structure and the apartment structure, we've got a gathering area and a outside courtyard area And then we've got obviously at the intersection of County E and Bel Air there is the building's main entrance with mail and public restroom and things like that. So the attempt, as Jason mentioned, was to try to basically focus our density in the more intense part of the development at the busiest part of the lot, being the northwest corner there, and start to work our way down back into 2 stories as we transition into the single-family neighborhood towards the south. Slide. So this is the view from the north, looking to the south on County Road E. So on the right-hand side of the screen, that would be the intersection. Again, the apartment structure has 2 stories of apartments over parking garage and amenity space. What you see there on the bottom right portion of the building would be the stone facade at ground level, which is basically a fitness area. And then on the ground floor on the left side of the screen there would be the handicap accessible ADA unit with a sidewalk connection. And again, trying to take our high density at the building or street corner and start to work our way down back into the neighborhood with the 2-story section of the apartment building on the east side. So with the plan view, this can kind of give you an indication overall of what we're trying to accomplish with the ground floor. So like I mentioned, even at the minimum density within neighborhood mixed use, we're going to have a substantial parking requirement. So our general concept with the ground floor plan was to try to use as much of the street-facing area to activate streetscape, like I mentioned again, and then use literally all of the rest of our building footprint on the site to dedicate to parking. So the areas that I've highlighted in green are basically those areas that we're using to try to activate sidewalk and activate streetscape. So starting on the northeast corner, you've got the handicap accessible ADA unit, and then working to the west, you have the fitness area along the County Road East side. And then the main building entrance with the public restroom, greeting area. And then working to the south, you've got a meeting room and a outdoor courtyard. And then you've got your sidewalk connections to the three townhomes to the south there. So vehicular access comes from Jansen. From there, you've got a drive aisle with 11 surface parking stalls outside, 6 indoor garage stalls attached to the townhome units, and then 15 stalls within the apartment structure at ground floor. And I'll talk to some more specifics about parking here in a little bit. A couple other notes with the site plan. On the east end of that property, we've got a 25-foot setback between us and the neighbor's lot line. So that 25-foot setback is going to be a vegetated green space and green buffer. Stormwater has been something that has come up quite a bit. Stormwater, so a couple of different things. One, that 25-foot vegetated area gives us an opportunity to direct stormwater to where we can actually infiltrate naturally and use the vegetation to make good use of that stormwater. Even if that's not sufficient, we'll certainly be working with the watershed district and the building department. There's no way we'll be able to do this development without handling our volume control, rate control, and filtering that stormwater before it leaves the site. One other quick note, we did do a phase 1 environmental assessment on this property that came back clean. And as Jason mentioned, we do have a clean tank closure report from MPCA as well. Snow storage was a question that came up a fair amount. And again, we're looking to use that 25-foot setback to the east for for being able to plow snow and maintaining the parking lot. Slide. So this graphic here, and Jason sort of mentioned what we're targeting as far as a future land use intent of neighborhood mixed use. And you see that we're basically trying to align with that intersection in terms of creating a residential anchor for this area. You've got Bean Company, which is a coffee and ice cream shop there on the southwest corner that is a great start, I think, for this intersection, and continuing to add residential units and foot traffic and customers to us is a great next step in trying to build out this intersection. And we think that a strong residential anchor there is going to provide good prospects for redevelopment of the northeast and northwest corners as well. So just to kind of give some backstory as well, we looked at a lot of different uses on this property, and certainly all those different uses came up during the corridor action plan as well from community members. And talking to developers, bankers, local business owners, what this intersection faces as a challenge is the ability to build new construction and achieve commercial leases that justify new construction. Bean Co. was a great move in that they were able to remodel a building and get to a lease that allowed them to perform financially. But all of the other commercial uses, and this property currently has the gamut of commercial uses available to it, have proven to not attract development in the last 13 years. And so that's why we're sort of looking at what is the future land use plan to try to give us an indication of if we have to rezone this into something else, what makes sense, and trying to align with the corridor action plan and the future land use is where we end up looking to do residential units. Slide. This is just kind of bringing up some of the things Jason mentioned. Like you said, 16 to 34 dwelling units per acre. That results in 10 to 22 dwelling units for this particular property. So parking specifically, so what we've achieved in this design is 32 total parking stalls for 18 units. We're just over one parking stall per bedroom. Within the apartment structure, we have exactly one parking spot per unit. So we have a total of 21 enclosed parking stalls for a total of 18 units. So we're trying to, like I said, maximize the number of parking stalls that we can fit on that ground floor. In addition to the amount of parking stalls that we build there, I think it's important to consider the way we manage those. So if you look at multifamily buildings along Bel Air and in other parts of the city and the metro, a lot of times you'll have street parking in places where there's empty off-street parking spots available, whether enclosed or not enclosed. So there's a couple of management practices that we think will be simple and effective at addressing that. And the main ones being basically not assigning stalls within that enclosed parking area and making those free for tenants. So what that does is it prevents somebody from not wanting to lease a stall and thereby deciding to just park on the street instead. So it gives them the opportunity to go, without having to pay more money, to go try to find an indoor parking spot. If those stalls aren't assigned, then it's much more likely that gets fully utilized, that someone, rather than just using their stall, like if they go to work and somebody comes back, they can park in any stall. So you're likely to have full usage of that indoor parking all the time. So the other thing it does is somebody comes to check to see if a parking spot is available in that parking garage. If not, they're going to leave that and then take the first thing available in those surface parking spots outside of that parking garage. So we think, yeah, again, with the long-term management of the property, that's also a key part of making parking effective on this development. Slide. So like I mentioned, just kind of talking through how this property fits into the intersection as a whole. We see it as a strong residential anchor that facilitates a lot of new development and future businesses that would end up operating there on the corner. And I'll kind of close by saying we really do want to try to find something that ultimately benefits this community, and so we appreciate your guys' input. And in addition to the feedback we've gotten from neighbors, appreciate the city's process of being willing to collect all this feedback. It really gives us a better, clearer path, not necessarily easy, but at least clear path of what we've got to overcome in order to be able to build in this community. So appreciate your attention, and pending questions and comments, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. McKillian. I suspect the council will have questions, but why don't we hold off on that? I think we're going to hear from the public first, and then if you could stick around, we might have some questions for you, I'm sure. Thank you. All right, at this time, I do want to invite the public to offer comment on this. I have a sign-in sheet. If you didn't sign in, that's okay, but I'm going to go through the 4 names on the sheet first, and anyone who wants to speak to this issue may do so. So the first name I have on my list is Lee Branwall. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. If Lee is here, Mr. Branwall, if you could step up, please. And if you could state your name and address for the record, that would be helpful. Thank you.
3583 Glen Oaks Avenue. You all received emails from us, and everything we had from the last meeting is in those notes, and so I don't think I need to go through. But there's a few things. One is that a correction I'd like to make is when I was here the last time, I indicated that I was the spokesperson for 12 of the neighbors, okay? And so it says 5 were here, but, what I represented was 12 people. And the people who spoke here were all part of that 12. So the other thing is the developer indicated that he talked to neighbors. I don't think any of us. No. So we were not included, and we know the people on that, and so nobody ever talked to us from the developers on it. So, and we're very strongly against it. And the issues, you saw the main issues we had, and so I won't go into those now. But the height, the compatibility with the area. The density on-site parking too, and one of the things, parking on Bel Air. I walk that almost every day. Just my walk, and there's usually very few, if any, cars parked. Today there was no cars parked on there. So parking is an issue, and we're concerned about it. And the one thing we are concerned very much about is handling the water runoff. And I'll just point that out, especially in the wintertime, where you're going to get the snow, you're going to get all the salt and everything else, silt that goes with it. And even if they talked about tanks, but, in the winter, all that snow is going to be pushed. And when it melts, the ground's frozen, so it's all going to flow on Pepper Tree Pond. And we the landowners that live on Pepper Tree, we pay to get that pond treated every year, and we don't want to see any more silt and stuff in there. And the city had talked about dredging that some years ago, but it never happened, and it's filling with silt all the time. And we're concerned, with the loss of trees, and it was indicated that they have to be replaced of tree for tree, but the mature trees do a lot better more for the environment than just the, putting seedlings or something else in there. And outside of that, whatever's, you've got all our input, and but there's actually 18 people that I have talked to that live in that neighborhood, and every single one is very much against this. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Branwell. Appreciate your testimony. The next name on my list is Ann Coves. And again, if you could state your name and address for the record, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Excuse me, Ann Coves, 3585 Glen Oaks Avenue.
Thank you.
I don't really have much more to add to what Lee had said, other than I don't know how many of you know that particular area, but it would be really nice if some of you could drive past it and just kind of visually see what it's like. We have Jansen Avenue that goes up to Bel Air, and there's a lot of kids in our neighborhood, and they use that hill to walk up to get to school bus or to do different things. With parking on Jansen, if with this project goes through, or it's going to complicate it and make it more dangerous. There's no sidewalks on either side of Jansen for kids or anybody else that does walking through the neighborhood. So I guess that's one of my additions. Main concern was the children. School buses are going up that hill, and it's very narrow, especially now during winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coates. The next name on my list is Chris Green.
Hello, Chris Green, Greene, and the address is, 3587 Glen Oaks Avenue. Just to make good use of everyone's time, I won't go through all the concerns that you already have written down, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, with regard to the height of the proposed building, we saw some examples of other buildings of similar height around town, and I would point out that in those examples, the building was a lot further back from the sidewalk or the street or the intersection. And the height of the proposed building is, a 3-story building, and its height is enhanced by the physical situation in which it would be built. It's on a high point, and it's very close to the corner. And so that, combined with the hill down into the neighborhood where the adjacent homes are a lot lower, makes, a 35-foot building there looks a lot taller than a 35-foot building that's set back further from the street. So like Ann Cove said, I would encourage all of you, as I did to the Planning Commission, to not even just drive by, but just get out of your car, spend 5 or 10 minutes walking around that area and really try to envision this 3-story building. I think it's being present at the location gives you a better picture of what may be built compared to the renderings that we've seen tonight. Another issue that hasn't really been talked about too much is the issue of the potential for a turn lane on Bel Air Avenue. Right now, there's kind of a half lane on the right as you're heading north on Bel Air at that intersection. It's commonly used as a turning lane, and there may be expense to the city in actually establishing a turning lane there if there's going to be increased traffic from this proposed apartment building. So that's something I think that ought to be considered. Let's see. The only other thing I had was that I do appreciate the designer's attempt to have this blend we've been talking about between the apartment to the townhouse to the existing residential homes that are there. But that same concept, just because the blend is a good thing, doesn't mean the proposed project is the only way to do that. You could also have a blend of apartments to townhouses to homes without a 3-story building right there on the corner. So even though it's a well thought out plan, I hope their talents can be applied to making a scaled back proposal, because I think what's being proposed here is just too much. It's too much. It's too many residences in too small of a space. And I think the whole thing needs to really be looked at again and rethought and scaled back. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Those are the names on my list, but anyone else who would like to speak to this is welcome to do so. Mr. Watson, please state your name and address for the record.
Frank Watson, 3569 Glen Oaks, W-A-T-S-O-N. Chris stole most of my thunder for the height, but I think Jason had the most powerful image tonight was the picture of the Arbor building, which is 33 feet high. This one's 6.5 feet higher. Go stand at the Arbor building and imagine another building, same, but 6.5 feet higher on that corner. That's a visual that you can actually see by going down and looking at the arbors. That's what's going to be on this corner. I'm not, I like Chris said, I kind of like the scale down thing where it goes down. I mean, eventually something's going to get built there. I just don't want to be like, well, this has been going on for 13 years now. Let's just build something. I don't want to see that thrown out. I've seen that a few times with the past city councils, so I don't want to see it again because that's always a poor excuse and has poor outcomes. And I know stormwater is kind of my passion right now because I'm on Pepper Tree Pond and I see the silt building up in the back right off my property there, and it concerns me. And I really haven't heard a really good plan with handling the water runoff. Maybe we're going to put it on our 25-foot setback. Well, I don't think the neighbor is going to really appreciate that who lives downhill right next to them. Not only in the summertime, but also the winter runoff in the spring once it melts. I mean, parking, we could beat that to death. You just drive around most apartment buildings and you see cars parked on the street. The Planning Commission member, Edmondson, he said that people will take parking into consideration if they know they only have one spot. They probably won't live there, or they'll figure something out. Well, we know what they figure out. It's not illegal to park on the street, and that's what they do. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Would anyone else like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council. I'd like to invite Mr. McKilligan back up, if you would. I've got a couple questions to start things off, and I'm sure many on the council have additional ones. Thank you. So my first question is, you've heard emails, calls at the previous public meetings, and then here, the concern over the height. And the point is well taken. You live in a small 1 or 2 story neighborhood, and you live there for a reason, and you don't want a big building. So my question is, if you reduce that, say, from 3 stories to 2 stories, do you still have a financially viable project on your hands?
If we can only build 1 story above structured parking, no. I've built podium developments that had anywhere from 3 to 5 stories above structured parking. I've never built anything with anything less than 3. And we're proposing 1.5. So we're trying to minimize that. That being said, the community's seen the same proposal 3 times. They haven't seen basically our process of redesign and taking input. So there is, there are ways, having heard this feedback, to lessen the intensity and the physical height of the building. So But to directly answer your question, if we can only be one story over structured parking, that's really tough. You know, there's other ways to potentially reconfigure the lot layout. But, you know, the intent with basically going 2 stories above structured parking is that allows us to provide more of those street activation elements at the ground floor. And so that's sort of what we're trying to balance, is how we activate the street, create an attractive development while still getting some sort of leasable space above that parking footprint that we're building.
Okay. So my other question is, are you open to a different business model that instead of renting, we're building condos where purchasers would own the property? And if so, does that change the economics of it such that we can lower the height of it?
Yeah, so there's a couple different moving pieces there. A lot of it has to do with market conditions in March of 2023. Being that interest rates are high, entry-level home ownership is particularly difficult right now. So you've got strength in rental market and weakness in a for sale market. So that puts a lot of pressure on trying to make units available for sale. We have had conversations with association specialists about whether we could at least make the 3 townhomes for sale. And it sounds like there is a path, and I think, especially with willingness from the city, there's a path to, subdivide those 3 and at least make those 3 for sale, albeit it's a little bit tricky when you have a for rent structure that those units reside in. So there is a legal path. So that's, you know, the option of selling those 3 units is viable. I would say the option, if we had to sell the apartment units as condos, I think that would make the development difficult as a whole.
Okay. So the last question I have is with regard to parking. I'm trying to get a sense of, you know, what kind of parking needs you would actually have. So with the 18 apartment units, can you give me a sense of they're 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom? What's the breakdown of that?
So we're 15 apartment units. 5 are 2-bedroom? 5 of which would be 2-bedroom. So yeah, you've got 10 1-beds and 5 2-beds. So yeah, I've been around for lease-ups on multifamily projects. You know, the average, this is very local. It varies a lot whether you're in St. Paul or Woodbury or White Bear Lake, whether or not people are, how many cars they have. We expect anybody here to be car dependent. There's no way around that. So that's really why we were shooting for that 1 stall per bedroom at least. That way we can still offer 2 stalls for anybody that has a 2-bedroom unit. And then even if basically all of the the 15 units, so let's see, we'd have 20. If we take the 20 total bedrooms, so say there's 20 cars parked between the structured parking under the apartment building plus 5, so 20 total parked cars would mean you fill the parking garage and then you have 5 out of the 11 filled in the surface parking. So you still have 6 available stalls for visitors and guests if 100% of those bedrooms have a car parked on site at any given time. So that was sort of the thought process on how we got to the number we did.
Okay, thank you. Council, I'm sure we have questions and comments. Who wants to go first?
Quick question. And it's actually not for the applicant, for staff, but just on, follow up on the parking, their metric is 1 stall per bedroom. That's kind of what they're thinking. What's our metric? Because we're above that now, right? I think we're off by 4 or 5 on the parking in terms of what we think the parking should be on that site. Is it an acreage discussion, or how do we come to that number?
Mayor, members of the council, the city's general parking requirement for medium-density residential like this is 2 stalls per unit.
2 stalls per unit, okay.
It doesn't speak to bedrooms, it speaks to units.
Okay.
And under that standard, 18 units would require 36 parking stalls. The concept plan currently shows 32 total stalls, or 4 stalls short of that requirement.
Yeah, thanks.
Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you. So, Mr. Lindahl, could you address the modifications that we made with Barnum's 1 and 2, that where we have a different interplay than 2 per unit? What other flexibilities have we engaged in other kinds of relatively recent developments?
Mayor, members of the council, in comparing this to Barnum and the changes there, I would just offer some context for that first. It's a much bigger building. There was a 50-50 breakdown of internal versus surface parking in those developments. But basically, they provided 1.5 stalls per unit, or 1.14 stalls per bedroom. And that was the ratio that was worked out under their design in the PUD that was approved for those particular projects. It also should be noted that Barnum, the first phase, the Barnum, did include a proof of parking to add additional parking if it was found to be needed.
My point was simply to say we have used other standards in other settings, though, to compare 3/4 of an acre at Ian Bel Air with the former site of the stadium is that requires a lot of stretching. So context is important. Mr. Mayor, if I can continue?
Please.
So I want to start, Mr. McKilligan, by thanking you. I think you have been, first of all, you were fully active in the County Road E corridor meetings. I think I'm the only council member that attended all of them, and you were there as well, and colleagues. You took this seriously, you participated. Thank you. I think your care has been shown in the attention that you have given to how you try and make this workable. It's a tough, tough gig, and the space that we have is a challenge. I appreciate the flexibility and the design creativity that you've shown, and I also appreciate the forthrightness that you've shown in answering questions. So in the 14 years that I have been on this council, I appreciate the work that you have done, and it stands out above other proposals, both for this quarter and for some other places. So just I want to say thank you. I do have some questions for you. So you are a relatively young company. What is your norm for building and either owning or selling for management going forward? What's your company's business plan and business model when it comes to is it design, build, and manage? Is it design, build, and something else? How do you guys think about that, and particularly for your company as a whole, and how are you thinking about it for this project?
So thanks for your comments, Councilmember Edberg. As far as our business model, so to date, everything that we've built, we still own and not actively property manage. We have a property management partner that we work closely with, but we're the asset owners and managers of all of those properties. This project, we have we have a group of veteran real estate investors that we work with, that we've partnered with to start to work on the capital investment for this project. Our equity partner was here for Planning Commission, Josephine Herron. So the plan is to basically, right now, I'd say, you know, in the current rate environment, we would be holding this for sure. I think, you know, eventually, what we've communicated to investors is that we would try to lease up, stabilize this, and hold it for at least 3 to 5 years, and then at that point, we'll be able to figure out, you know, what makes sense once the property has, you know, has a stable track record of cash flow and things like that. So I guess my answer would be the same thing we tell our equity partners, is that it kind of depends on what happens with the market. But the short answer is we own and operate and stabilize all the projects that we build.
The reason I ask is that the concept of the management plan for parking depends on somebody honoring the spoken agreements.
Correct.
Well, okay, they're not agreements in writing. We're in concept discussing the conditions under which parking might be adequate. And the ability to make that stick is kind of a critical piece. And if you and your entities, your business entity is able to make comment now and not make it stick later, that's an uncomfortable kind of place to be. So just calling that out, and however the next conversations go, want you to know that's a concern.
Yeah.
I'm curious about some of the drawings. Mr. Lindahl, could you pull up one of the slides? That might be one. There's a couple of others that show. All right, so I have walked that. I live 3 blocks from this corner, all right? There are mature trees. I don't know which ones might come down, or some or all. Some are on the other side, not on this property. How accurate are these drawings with the tops of the trees and the relative elevations of the building?
So, good question.
So it's like, how much creative license was used by the artist in constructing the drawings?
So, yeah, I would say, to answer the question, if there's discrepancies, it's less of a creative license as much as it is perspective and trying to make something artificial blend into an existing photo of a place. But what I will say, those trees, so there is a strip, basically a buffer that when there are leaves on those trees, creates an almost solid buffer along the east property line of the project, and all of those are on the neighbor's property. So we do have some trees. There are some trees on our property along the east side and down in the southeast corner. So I'm not saying that we aren't taking away any trees, but that there is an existing, it's not evergreen, so the leaves fall off during the winter, but during the summer, there's very much a tree buffer to the east. My estimate is that those trees are about 30 feet tall, and I think when you walk by there or drive by there, you'll get that same sense too. So our building is going to be right about the same height as those existing trees. Well, a little bit
higher, and in the winter without leaves, more noticeable in relief as opposed to the summer. Yeah, okay. So let's talk about trees. Of the trees that are on your property in that east buffer, do you have a sense of how much of that needs to be cleared to facilitate? I appreciate the 25-foot setback, but in terms of management of existing tree vegetation, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, without having the tree survey just kind of looking at the, Jason, if you wanted to go to the slide that has the site layout. Just from first glance, it looks like we might be able to keep a couple of those there at the southeast corner. They're also not, those aren't great trees.
Right.
They're something, but they're not particularly tall or large trees. But yeah, so that buffer strip, you're gonna have vegetation, and it's not going to be able to function as a solid buffer between those properties for a long time. There's really, aside from building a 30-foot wall, there's not really anything that we could do that would create a physical, complete barrier visibly. And I don't think that's the intent. But yeah, we do have the existing hardwood buffer on the neighbor's side, and we'll certainly contribute with more trees that eventually will add to that buffer.
So the previous owner of that property did not do a fine job of maintaining the fence. There's a privacy fence that exists, kind of sort of roughshod way. At the Planning Commission, the materials you provided talked about the construction of a fence. Is that presumably along that east boundary, or was that intended somewhere else on the property? What's the status of the fence on the east, and what other kind of fencing do you have in mind?
So what I would need to check is whether or not that fence is on our property line or theirs. Okay. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. But typically, in the approval process for these projects, there's a 6-foot privacy fence required. And that's certainly something that we've planned to do, basically on our property line, to make sure that at least we have something that we can maintain that consistently provides some privacy.
Cool, thank you. The last question for you is, so you made a comment a few moments ago when you were talking about the incentives for folks to fill the parking area under cover, and then if unsuccessful, they'll go out and grab their first one. But the way you framed that, it was like a sense that there would be an incentive to fill the ground floor under first. Do you conceive of the possibility that you might have more cars or that all of the parking spots will fill rapidly? And where in your imagination if there is overflow, okay, I'll create one. You've got a Christmas party, all right? You've got folks guess, if we fill the entire site on the owned property, what happens?
Let's see. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if parking is technically legal, but that's probably where they would try to go, is right off of Bel Air.
I'm going to save that question for Mr. Lindahl. He should know that one's coming. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else on the council have some thoughts and comments? Councilmember Hughes.
Just comments.
That's just an open
Questions
forum.
for him, but I
Okay. Councilmember Hughes, questions?
I don't know a lot about building. I'm just curious why you don't go down a little bit and bury a bit of your parking and then not be quite as high.
So we've looked at that option. If you go down, you basically need to, you can take up to 10% grade down into a parking structure. The way our elevations on this lot lay out, you'd basically have a parking lane going all the way across the property. So you would end up having to excavate almost the entire site 10 feet deep, and you'd have a very large circulation element that's used for nothing else but getting to a lower elevation. And then you end up with, unless you also then have a first-story structure above that, and have 2 stories of parking, you end up with less parking because you use so much of the buildable area with the circulation element that gets you to the elevation that would facilitate underground parking. So it becomes basically to actually get to a point where you've added parking in that scenario, the costs are prohibitive.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions before we get into some discussion? Any other questions for Mr. McKilligan? All right, thank you very much, appreciate it. How about questions for Mr. Lindahl? Councilmember Jones.
What's the maximum height that, if zoning approves, on anywhere in the city without a variance?
Mayor, members of the council, it varies throughout the community, but just to maybe narrow in a little bit, to the R6 category that seems to be the best fit for the concept plan and the neighboring residential area, the maximum height is the same, 35 feet.
Councilmember Edberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So continuing to talk about height. So 35 feet measured from where to where? Is that from the base of the foundation at ground level to halfway between the eave and the peak? Or I just want to make sure everybody's, when we say 35 feet, we know where that 35 feet is measured.
Mayor, members of the council, thank you for that question. So it's measured from the base of the point of the building that you're measuring to the top of a flat roof or the midpoint of a peaked roof.
And does it matter if you are planting your building in a hole, in a depression? Do you measure still from the base of the building, or do you measure from the base of the ambient ground?
Mayor, members of the council, you would measure from the base of the building the way the definition of height is designed or stated in the zoning code.
Okay. So not a couple/few hundred feet from the proposal is another three-story apartment building. Conversations with some individuals say, oh, but that's in a hole. It can be tall, but it's because it's planted in a hole, it doesn't seem so big. How does our code deal with that?
Mayor, members of the council, so the answer I would give you again is based on what the code defines for height. And in that, and it talks about measuring from the base of the building that you're measuring to the top of either a flat roof or the midpoint of the peak. It doesn't take into consideration a context of the topography of any individual piece of property.
Okay. Across the straight north, we permitted the school district to build a gymnasium at Mataska. At other places around County Road E, I'm thinking at E and White Bear Avenue, I perceive that we exceed the 35 feet. If we go east into Matamidi, we have 4-story apartments. And if we go all the way to the west to Barnum 1 and 2 and then pass into Gem Lake, there are a number of buildings that are 4-story in that stretch. Am I incorrect in thinking that those all exceed 35 feet? You know?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, there are, those particular buildings you're talking about would all exceed the 35-foot number that in the maximum height in the ordinance.
All right, thank you. So let's talk about parking for a moment. Both Bel Air and County Road E are governed under the county's rules and regs. And if Mr. Kauppi, because he knows the road infrastructure, if he's the right guy to throw it to, feel free to put him under the bus. What are the rules and regs for parking on Bel Air and E, and what options exist, if any, what requirements, what permits, whatevers, what do we have there?
Please. And it got tossed to me. Mayor, members. First off, just as a correction, Bel Air, south of E is city roadway. We did reconstruct that in, I'm going to mess this up, 2020-ish. So in the last few years, we did reconstruct that, that area. So starting with Bel Air, it is, as somebody noted, there are kind of parking lanes, so the kind of the fog lines, parking lanes that are designated along there. So being a more higher volume roadway, more of a neighborhood collector roadway within that residential zone, parking is appropriate. As we have studied that for different, for the project, some subsequent studies with looking at speed and volumes on the roadway, we don't see a lot of parking on there, at least along Bel Air. The homes that abut on the west side have relatively long driveways, so most of the people park in there. On the east side of Bel Air, it's primarily, at least on the north side, in the neighborhoods. So there's really not a lot of driveway frontage, steep slopes down into the neighborhood. So really not a lot of on-street parking that we saw throughout the last number of years anyways. There were a couple of homes that had and I think it was, at least during our project, that had a few folks that would park on the roadway, or typically parked on the roadway for one reason or another, that a spouse left earlier or later, and instead of shuffling cars around, they did use that for parking. I know it was brought up as far as where overflow parking, even for those homes, it is legal for if somebody's having a birthday party or a gathering, that it is legal to park on Bel Air in those instances. Going up to County Road E, at least immediate to Bel Air with the turn lanes, there's not, and I would have to go back and look at the actual roadway, but there isn't, at least in the several hundred feet east and west of Bel Air, because of the turn lanes, there is not parking available. Further down on E, I believe there are sections that have available parking, but they're further away from the intersection. Obviously, E is a county road, so they would manage those parking restrictions and whatnot, but typically would come to the city for direction and our blessing to do that.
And do we have any discretion, previous precedent, other available tools that would allow parking, that for us to allow parking on Bel Air as a norm? I agree with your assessment that parking is not the norm on Bel Air right now. Yes, there have been occasional cars that you see there, but that's not a norm. So if it's permitted, it's not used. Or what are our options there, realistically?
So realistically, obviously, we can, the city council has the ability to no park any roadway within the city. So that, starting from the extreme, from that end, and we have done it, where if we see issues with parking or on-street parking causing issues with sight distance coming out of intersections, just the general width of the roadway, curvature of the roadway. We have done, at least since I've been here, a number of no parking, and then obviously a number of them that have preceded me being at the city. As far as parking goes, a lot of the times, as our ordinances and our regulations, our zoning code layout. We obviously want parking on site, whether it be single-family residential, whether it be multifamily residential. We generally want the necessary parking to be on site, and using the street more as overflow for those occasions, with parties or gatherings.
Mr. Mayor, I have other questions, but I'm happy to yield to other council members to break up the monotony.
I don't think it's monotonous. If you got more questions, keep on going.
Thank you. Mr. Lindahl, let's talk setbacks. So this proposal is, in my understanding, modestly unique in the sense of bringing the building out closer to the intersection than would be the norm. I think one speaker noted that, and maybe it was you, that we have larger setbacks and generally we don't pull buildings out to the edges quite in the way that this is. Is that an accurate perception? Am I framing that correctly? Or how would you describe, because where I want to go with that is, okay, the report, the concept proposal and the analysis says that there would be requests to forego some of those setbacks to achieve, whether that's the positive activation of the streetscape or to create more space at the backside for parking and so on and so forth. But could you speak to that, please?
Mayor, members of the council, thanks for that question. I'll try to boil that down to a succinct answer. We could talk a lot about planning kind of overall spirit and intent of setbacks and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, I would say in my experience that our current code reflects a approach to planning for suburban neighborhoods to increase setbacks and provide more open space all around the buildings. If you look at the standards in this district, or excuse me, the proposed R6 district, it would be 30 feet on the front, the street side, and any rear yard, and then allow half that, or 15 feet, on a neighboring side. And so that original zone creates a context with great setback, with fairly large setbacks. Another approach to planning in the context that the developer mentioned is to reduce setbacks along portions of properties where you would like to activate the street and take advantage of the relationship and the design of the building between the street and that building itself. And so there's a difference between the general approach of our current zoning and the proposed more specific approach that the developer proposes for this site. And I'll just reiterate their thinking that they use, this isn't staff's thinking, this is theirs, that they could reduce the setbacks, create that more activation and better relationship with the street, and gain the advantage of focusing the intensity and height of the building the furthest that they possibly could from the neighbors.
Thank you. So if one were to wrestle with this concept, does the reduction of the setbacks create a public safety issue at the intersection? Here's a part of why I want to go to there. Some of the letters, some of the testimony at the Planning Commission spoke about the safety of children crossing at that intersection. Now, my family moved, we noted that building, at least 1971. My family moved 4 blocks away before that. So I've watched that intersection. When that was a gas station, dozens, hundreds of cars a day made a trip in filled with gas, made a trip out. I don't recall that we had an excessive public safety issue of, and Parkview School was there that whole time. So we had children moving back and forth. If we move the setback requirement included here, what is your assessment of the need for public safety considerations and other amendments?
So, Mayor, members of the council, and I'd invite the city engineer to chime in here, but what, with the reduced setbacks, what staff would then look at from a public safety perspective would be to balance the site triangles at any given intersection. And generally speaking, that's 25 or 30 feet? 30 feet. So, and just to maybe, if people aren't familiar with the concept of a site triangle, you basically stand at the corner of the street, of the curb, and you measure down either length of the curb from that corner, 30 feet, and then you draw a diagonal line between the two to create a triangle. So the distance from the point you're standing at the curb to the base of the triangle you create, it's a little bit different depending on the curb radius and that kind of thing. But generally the idea is that keeping those areas clear creates a sufficient sight line for cars as they maneuver through those intersections. And that becomes less of a concern for pedestrians or bicyclists because they move slower. The increased sight triangle gives more view shed and more time to react to a driver that may be in a car that's moving faster than the pedestrian. Anything else you'd add to that?
The only thing, Mayor, members of the council, that I would add is it is a signalized intersection. So there are stop conditions. There are those controls in place to, I'll call it, afford those safety measures for crossing the intersection, whether it be east and west or north and south.
I have a couple other questions for Mr. Lindahl. So, as was noted at the Planning Commission, has been noted in our materials, there's at least two administrative slash, there would need to be a rezoning act, and there is likely to be a request for a planned use development. Those are separate. They each have their own conniptions that are involved. So let's talk first about rezoning. The old zoning that is currently applicable to this site is no longer viable. Okay, we've gone a whole decade and more without having made auto use of the, well, take that back. There's some folks that cut through there every now and then. Okay, other than that, it hasn't been a gas station for a long time. So any use is going to require likely some type of rezoning, right?
So, Mayor, members of the council, I would just qualify that answer to say generally I agree with you, but I don't want to speak any use because that's a market condition that could change. But I think I would defer to the applicants' research and discussions they've had with their real estate partners, the bankers and other business interests, and what they see as the current zoning, which is auto-oriented business, which provides an extensive list of commercial uses, and the fact that the site hasn't seen redevelopment under that zone. And in this, just this other context I would give you is the city's comprehensive plan has a future land use map in it, which is the neighborhood mixed use category, which is what we've kind of based the discussion on. Because when the city has two tools to guide the use of property. The one that most people are familiar with is zoning, and it can be thought of as what you can do with the property now, and has more specificity or detailed standards to it. Number of parking stalls, height of the building, setback, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have the future land use category that's part of the comprehensive plan. And it is supposed to be the first place that the city looks for guidance if someone comes in and says, well, I'd like to do something here that the zoning doesn't allow me to do. So we looked at that category, and that's the neighborhood mixed use that provides a range of densities for us and a general list of uses. It allows for a mix of some commercial and residential to happen in circumstances, but it acknowledges that there may be certain sites that are only appropriate to be, all residential. So when we began discussions with the applicant, or any discussion we'd have with any landowner that came in and said, I want to do something different than what the zoning says I can do now, we start by looking at the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. And in this case, the applicant has tried to tailor his concept as closely as he can to those parameters. And getting a zoning category that fits that land use is, we have to figure out what fits there. Now, if we were having this conversation in, 2 years, when we've completed a more extensive review of the zoning ordinance and made some changes and adjusted things from that, maybe at that time we already have a appropriate zoning category that fits with that future land use category. That would be the goal. So that the PUD, I'm sorry, getting my point here, the PUD is basically the bridge between those things in the short term. It allows the city to try and get to the goals that they've set out in the future, in the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, without waiting for that process to be concluded. So the PUD would allow some deviations in the context of what the city's goals already were, in exchange for, asking for a higher quality development that wouldn't occur but for the PUD application.
So 2 implications for that. I'll play with the PUD first. The PUD is a point of negotiation. There is, because we don't have a zoning that fits directly with what our concept was, that becomes a place where we try and figure out how do we best achieve the overall objectives for as many people as possible, ideally everyone. Fair interpretation?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Second implication is that for the rezoning, that this particular rezoning was based on the request of the landowner to say, hey, these are the concepts that we think make sense, but if you'd had a different landowner with different objectives, they could have thought a different kind of rezoning conversation. Is that?
Mayor, council, yes. That it's dependent on the request.
Okay. So, cut to the nub. In the absence of a PUD and a rezoning, well, I'll take it back. I think your rezoning is the accurate conversation. What would the developer be allowed to do by right without, in the absence of a PUD and an absence of other stuff, what would this thing look like?
So, Mayor, members of the council, basically the auto-oriented business district would allow uses that the name implies. The gas station, car washes, that kind of things. Things that were auto-oriented, strip mall, small commercial kinds of uses.
And if we went to the neighborhood mixed use, how high would they be allowed to do by right without seeking variances, without changing? I mean, what would they have to do to fit in the absence of those other changes?
So, Mayor, members of the council, that's actually a really good question to illustrate the difference between zoning and land use. The neighborhood mixed use future land use category, the future land use categories in general are more general and speak about use and generally density, okay? And then it leaves the details of building materials, setbacks, height of the building, parking spaces, all those kinds of more specific development criteria are placed in zoning. So the idea is that the city sets out general parameters of what their goals are, allowing for, in this case, in the neighborhood mixed use, if someone came along and could pencil out or make a mixed use of some commercial and residential work here, that would be allowed. But it also acknowledges that in some cases that might not pencil out in those situations, and that residential is allowed. So the direct answer to your question is that the neighborhood mixed use category only provides use and density standard direction for the city. It doesn't speak specifically to height.
Okay. Last question for you is, in this conversation around density, so we have taken kind of the standard, we've adjusted it for the fact that that's only 2/3 of an acre as opposed to one full. Would you consider this to be a high density or a medium density?
So Mayor, members of the council, I'd answer that question in the context of what the zoning ordinance says and what the land use category allows for. So the medium density, R6 medium density residential category is the closest thing to match the proposal, the concept proposal. So I would generally classify it under the city's terms as medium density residential.
Okay, thank you. At the end of my conference, I have some for Mr. Copey, but again,
Does anyone else want to take a turn?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I
Member
don't have
Walsh.
any questions. This is the feedback. We can do feedback if you want.
Yeah, this is an open forum, and I'll just remind the council that as part of our plan, the goal here is to provide the applicants with as much feedback. Now's the time to say we love it, we hate it, here's what our expectations are, move forward, stop now. So if we can flesh that out a little bit, not that I don't appreciate all those questions, I think they're relevant to what that analysis is, but that would be helpful. So please, Councilmember Walsh.
So, Mr. Mayor, and I think it's a little tricky. This is the first time we've done this new process. I like the process. I think you guys are doing a great job. And I'll agree with my colleague. I appreciate the applicant embracing the process. It really helps. I mean, and you guys really I feel like you guys have really embraced the communication part of it and the showing up and really making an effort. So that's some feedback right there. This is the nervous part about prejudging. I don't want to prejudge my vote. I mean, this is a concept. The concept doesn't scare me. I'll choose my words carefully. This concept doesn't scare me. I like the attempt at height going from front of the lot to the back of the lot. I think it's a good shot. Like some of the neighbors have said, they appreciate the effort there. So I look forward to future designs as you've listened and you mentioned future designs becoming. The last piece of feedback would be, I mean, I just favor ownership over rental whenever possible. So I was thinking ownership only on the townhouses. I wasn't even imagining that the building would be condos. I get that part of it, but if there is a way to coexist, I get the complexity of that. I mean, if you own your place and then you've got renters coming and going, but there's got to be an agreement, a covenant, that would be tricky, but doable. So, but always, I shouldn't say always, but really the preference would be for ownership when possible. Just home ownership just is better for the city when we can do it. So that's my limited feedback early, without prejudging my vote. So I appreciate the process.
Anyone else have any feedback? Councilmember Jones.
Yeah. I mean, just for the variance aspect that may or may not be coming, this property, and for those who know me are shocked, I'm the stack 'em high and flood 'em fly guy. 35 feet, you don't have 1 inch from me, not one. I think the residents have a good argument, and if we do rezone, 35 feet's it, you're gonna have to live within 35 feet. Parking, I am concerned about, and I do like what I'm hearing. I'm not concerned with the 4 stalls short of what would be required. But I know in my ward, we've got a couple apartment complexes on both ends. One's on Bel Air. One idiotic apartment building, and I'll say it, I don't care, they charge their tenants to park. And guess where all the tenants park? On the street. And I don't care how much you charge it. I'm going to save the $15 or the $100, build it into the rent, build it into the mortgage, whatever the case may be. That, I can't handle that. But, you know, the argument I believe Mrs. Coase brought up about Jansen. Cokes? No, I believe you brought that up, Cokes. You know, that does, yeah, I'm a sidewalk guy. You want to build it, I want to see a sidewalk connecting Glen Oaks to Bel Air. It does make sense because I'm assuming there is going to be overflow parking. So I'm going to cut you some slack and say, yeah, it's going to happen. I don't think, and no offense to Mr. Edberg, you don't see a lot of huge parties at apartment buildings. I think that's a one-off scenario, but it needs to handle the one-off scenario. You know, that's fair. And I'm more afraid of the during the day parking. That's where I see the problems, where the plowing, the this, the that, the kids walking, being safe. That's where I'm seeing that. So that's on my radar. And I'll just say I find this, and this is kind of for all the south side, I find it really ironic that as you go from the north side to the south side, and the north side's denser, that people are more apt to not, they got the big streets, big corners, open this, and they don't want parking on their streets. But you go farther north you go, the more denser it gets, the more parking is acceptable. I find that very ironic. So yeah, people, parking on streets is actually okay. It's traffic calming devices. It's actually not a horrid thing. Stormwater, Mr. Watson brings it up. That pond, as the history guy, I found 1937 photos with Pepper Tree Pond there. It is not a stormwater pond. It has been a body of water for, way before development. Who knows what the farmers let drain into there, but since it's on the top of the hill, probably not a lot got in there. So I am concerned, and Mr. Copey, do we know if we're using that as the area's deposit before it goes to the Mississippi?
Mayor, members of the council, not having seen, as a concept submittal, the drainage plan.
Just in the general area, Paul, where does Mr. Copey, does that drainage in that general area, because we know where it's going to drain, most of it. It's going to hit, if it does freeze up and we have all these stormwater treatments, we know it's going to freeze up, stop, follow the parking lot down to Jansen, and there it goes.
I would have to look at the exact topography out there, but the building's generally on the top of the hill. I'd have to look at the parking lot. Appears it would go out to Jansen and get into that system. Some of the front stuff and the building possibly out to County Road E, which again goes down, kind of slopes down to the north.
And that leads to part B on, because going, as a gas station picked up filth, salt, a lot of salt. Every business salts unbelievably way too much, just FYI. But all the gas, the oil from that business being on that surface, I'm just curious if that went to County Road E. I'm assuming it probably did, as opposed to Jansen. So that's my concern. I do trust that, Ramsey Washington will step in, and I do trust staff that stormwater will be done. I have seen effective, and Mr. Brand, by the way, very, very well represented of your letters and your emails and your entire group. Thank you for the respectful. I have a feeling we're going to disagree.
Go ahead. If you're going to speak, why don't you hop up to the podium there? Appreciate it.
That pond is part of the watershed district that goes all the way into the Mississippi.
Yeah, just goes a different part than.
Yeah, it was a pond once upon a time.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Just a pond, and my oldest son used to trap muskrats there.
Oh, yeah.
Before it was developed, years and years ago. But
I found pictures of 1937 with that pond there.
But right now, it's part of that whole watershed district.
So that's I sit on the Vlamo board. That's an important aspect for me. And I'm just saying, we've seen treatments work, Spruce Park being a massive one that we pretty much dug up, put huge tanks. It does get frozen. We actually make it harder by putting an ice rink there. Just FYI, and along Lake Avenue, there are underground tanks that are right next to, so if that's the route that the developer chooses to go, I do trust that route, because Lake Avenue has a lot of underground storage for stormwater, and it's closer to the lake, FYI.
I have one other question.
Just briefly, sir, go ahead.
On Bel Air, those lanes are bicycle lanes, aren't they?
I'll defer to Mr. Copy on that.
I don't think they are actually designated.
And if we don't know, that's okay.
Mayor, members of the council, they're mixed-use lanes. They're not specifically, they're allowed use for bike lanes, but they are allowed parking as well.
And then just rough comments overall, just as far as what, we've all seen on this property. Nobody's, and this is to address Mr. Watson's fair comment, just don't do something because you can do something. Well, I'm down to we have two things to do, and one I'm not going to ever support. Nothing is, okay, we got Bean and Company went on their corner. I don't see anybody lining up to put 3 more Bean and Companies on each corner. I'm not seeing anybody coming up and say, hey, I want to build a small retail strip mall and do this here. I'm not seeing that, and it has been plenty of time. The economy has recovered. We've seen it, really before 2008, 9, 10, there was opportunity to redevelop this property, and it just never happened. Or any of the properties. I mean, the Super America had left long before 2008 and the Great Recession. So this corner has been an issue for a long, long time. So I think we're looking at housing. That's what we are looking at as far as that is. So I'm open to the rezoning. I'm open to what they have, and I am leery about the parking. I mean, to the point where I'm like, yep, no lease parking. Yep, build a sidewalk. Just because I know it's been a problem for the other neighborhoods of these off-street, on-the-street parking. That is a major pain. And once you build it, you don't care anymore. It's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. I'm looking, parking tags, I don't think that would work. Either way, but I think this is a good proposal with what the developer has brought forward, how they've worked with it. I will say this, the corridor action plan is a guideline. Action plan makes it sound, we don't like plans. Plans make it sound like it's done. It's a guideline, but I appreciate all the support in there that you did do for that. Also with, part of what we received in our packet, hearing from one of the major real estate agents in the community, saying this is a good thing. This is good. So I think that's important. So I'm open to moving forward, and could I say no like Mr. Walsh? Yes. I'm not going to promise anything. But I'm open to that. I don't think you're going to be wasting any time and effort and money, and I don't want to do that for the management company either. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other feedback for the developers from the council? Councilmember Edberg.
I actually would like to ask Mr. Copy 2 quick questions. Have we ever had issues with developers not being able to appropriately handle stormwater on their property, retention, storage, movement properly through our systems? And would this property strike you as a problem property for us?
Mayor, members of the council, any development such as this has to meet our requirements as well as the watershed district requirements. There's not the flexibility like a PUD. There is strict requirements that they need to meet. So they meet those requirements. They're meeting the treatment, the rate control, the volume control, infiltration. All those requirements are being met by meeting those required standards. So there's not an end around as far as not meeting them.
And does that correlate to if this concept were to be approved and developed, we would not be exacerbating the normal siltation that's occurring in Pepper Tree Pond?
Typically, we actually, looking at the existing undeveloped conditions, we will likely better the conditions than decrease any kind of conditions.
So where I'm at, I'm not saying yes. Parking is an issue. Parking is my biggest issue. Height is probably my second issue. Yeah. So having said that, I think there's much to be said. This is the best proposal that I've seen for this corner in a long time. And I would like to see if we can find a way to get to yes. I don't know if that's possible, and that's where I'm listening. So that's my feedback.
Anyone else? Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, so to answer your questions, I generally support the concept plan. I don't have as huge a problem with the height, especially since you're working on it. And part of the reason I don't have a huge problem with the height is I think some of it is gained by the architecture you've chosen with the peak. If the whole thing was a flat roof, it would probably bring it down a little bit, and I don't find that very attractive. So there's that part of it. I also don't have near as huge of a problem with parking. People park in front of my house, all down the street, all over my neighborhood, all the time. Sometimes their teenage children are doing that for the extent that the kids live there. In the case of my neighbor, and again, I'm not criticizing it, I'm just saying that happens. People visit, they're there a couple times a year. The entire place is shut down, and there is no parking, and it's bigger than a Christmas party, and that's what it is. And we park on the street in order to leave our driveway open. There we are. But so it's not as large of a problem. I appreciate your idea with keeping the parking open, so people would be incentivized to use the parking there. I think it's kind of cool with the incentives, the activation on the street. I think it's going to be hard. I think it would be very hard to turn this into, 3 single-family homes. And I could see if I was living there, that's what I'd want. And I don't know that I would want anything other than that. And so it's almost like there's nothing you're going to be able to bring that I would want if I lived next door to it. So I get that it is not in my backyard. So those are not my big problems there. I would say I like the PUD concept because what I like is trees. And so I would be incentivizing isn't the right word, but I would be encouraging our planning department to ask you guys to put as much natural landscaping, large natural landscaping as we can possibly do, because I think that's one of the things that makes the arbors less terrible is the amount of landscaping that's there and the way that, frankly, the height of the building isn't nearly as terrible as it is. I don't actually ever notice it. I recognize that it's not near other people's single-family homes, but it is attractive with the landscaping. So I think that's it. I don't have a problem with zoning. I would support the PUD, and I agree. I prefer ownership. I can see how it would be a real problem, though. I'm not sure I would want to buy one of those townhouses, knowing that I've got this weird rental system with the parking lot right in my backyard. So I don't know how you get that done. Also, it would be kind of weird to have kind of an association of owned condos next to this townhouse, and then how would you, I'm not in an association, so I wouldn't know how that homeowners association would work, but those are just such different structures, so I wouldn't expect that to be owned. I generally would favor it, but those are my comments.
Any other comments? Let's hear it.
Hard no. I don't like the height. I'd rather see you just do the townhouses and be done with townhouses. Or we do it green space and put a Edberg trail through the green space.
Is that a posthumous award?
Well, by the time it gets developed, it might be.
We have a Sather Trail.
I'd like to rename that too, by the way.
He's still with us.
All right. Well, so a couple comments for me. First of all, thank you for being the guinea pigs in this process. This is a brand new kind of introductory preliminary review process, and I want to compliment city staff, the council, and quite frankly, those in the neighborhood and members of the public. This was sort of the whole point. The city, prior councils before my time, had kind of been tagged with getting too far along in projects before we open it up and really talk to people, and I think we've done a good job. So for purposes of this stage, I think what you got is, other than one, it's not a hard no. We got to sharpen our pencils a bit. The people in the council are receptive to it, and we're going to reserve judgment, myself included. My thought on this is we have a old, dilapidated, abandoned gas station that looks terrible and has for over a decade, and I'd love to see that change. To Mr. Watson's point, that doesn't mean we're just going to take the first thing that comes through the door. I'll be candid, if there were a line of developers that wanted to do two-story offices, another gas station, some other kind of retail, they'd be in front of the line with you, ahead of you guys. That's just a reality. But you guys are here, and you're willing to invest money in the community, and I think the council needs to take that seriously, and we do have housing goals. So the process continues. I think you've gotten a lot of good feedback, and we'll see what you can do. I think I support Councilmember Edberg. I think we want to get to yes in some fashion. Whether or not that makes everybody happy, probably not. That's not how these things work. You're never going to make everybody happy all the time. So that's where we're at with this process. So I hope you found it useful, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you for your time. All right, let's jump into 9B, abatement of hazardous property and public nuisance at 2239 Carlisle Court update.
Good evening.
Mayor, members of the council, just to kick off this item, we're going to be hearing an update from building official Ben Agan about staff's conversations with Ramsey County in an effort to assist this homeowner with working on the issues that the city has cited to this point. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben.
Please.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Just to remind you, December 13th, this hazardous building abasement case came before you. After some discussion with the owner and yourselves, you directed us to file a hazardous building abatement order, which we did. We served the owner on January 4th, and that set in motion 60 days for her to comply. On February 8th, we were contacted by Ramsey County, so midstream through her 60-day time frame. They asked to meet with us. We sat down with them. They basically said that they are working with her to provide loans for her to rehabilitate the home completely. They are going to allocate the funds for her. They're going to use their preferred contractors. So in other words, they're not just giving her money. And at the end of the meeting, they said, this is what we want to do, but we need more time to do it. So knowing that you had given us a directive to file with the court and proceed with the abatement order, we told them that we needed to have some written proposal from them. So they did provide us a written proposal on March 2nd. It's basically pretty simple. They said they would clean all the trash out of the house by March 31st. They would remove the cars that are sitting in the driveway by April 15th. And they would complete the rehab by August 31st. And then they asked that we withhold proceeding with the order while they do that work. So as of today, I went there today. The cars have already been removed. Miss Remus had them removed. She donated them. Basically because the county said they want to start the clean out this Friday, and they said they wouldn't do it if she didn't get rid of them. So 2 of the cars are gone. They want to start the clean out. They have a contractor hired. He'll start on Friday, and by the end of the weekend, hopefully the clean out would be done. So we're coming before you tonight to ask you, do you want us to proceed with the abatement order and file, because she's past her 60 days by 10 days. So in light of the county's involvement, we're thinking this is her best opportunity to probably get the house rehabilitated, but we want to honor your directive, and so we're looking for direction.
And Mayor, members of the council, I just add a little bit of detail. When talking with the county, they have indicated to us that Nan has qualified and secured, or the property owner has qualified and secured for a grant funds to fund the cleanup that's scheduled for this weekend, and that she has qualified for a loan for the repairs on the property. Now, they haven't set a closing date. That closing hasn't occurred, but she said that they basically identified two sources of funding, one for the clean out, one for the rehab, and that the property owner is working with them, and she has been approved for those two programs.
Thank you. So one big question. If we were to grant the property owner a little bit more time and see if this actually comes to fruition, the county money comes through and we get an improvement, rehabilitation of the home, which is what this council's goal is, are we foreclosing our ability to move forward in court to do the things that we need to do? What's the legal ramifications? And if the city attorney needs to weigh in, please jump in.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor and council, I actually don't see that as limiting the city's option. If anything, I think it strengthens the city's position that you've given yet another opportunity to try to come into compliance. And then if that still doesn't happen, I think that just shows. I've always taken the position that a city trying to work with an owner, give plenty of opportunity to try to come into compliance, multiple notices, multiple opportunities before you finally take that action, which frankly did occur, and this would be one more if you allow this to occur. My personal thought on it, the fact that the county's stepping in with their contractor, to me, that's a real positive sign in these cases, because far too often I've seen where I'll get to it, and of course nothing really ever happens, and so you really need something significant to change that, and involvement with the county and county contractor, in my mind, is quite a significant change.
So procedurally, what does this look like? We're agreeing to the court to grant a period of time, and we're stipulating to some period of time to effectively put on hold us moving forward.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor and Council, I would see this as just a consensus of the council that yes, we agree to let the county process play out in the timeline that was provided, and then we'll, if in fact this falls apart for some reason and the issue isn't addressed, then we can always bring it back and say, well, we gave that additional opportunity, it didn't work.
Okay. Well, so I'll just share my thoughts. To me, this seems like a no-brainer. If the county actually has money and there's a real possibility of this house being rehabbed, then we should give the property owner some time. But to me, I see this as on a real short leash. I mean, if there's timelines involved and real grants that are provided, it needs to happen. Because I'm going to ask you, is that your general file, or is that the file for just this case?
For this case.
Yeah, and the reason I illustrate it, for the record that those that can't see, it's a very thick case. This is not a couple-month-old thing. We talked about this in December. This has been going on for years. And the goal is compliance and rehabilitation. So if there's a real possibility of that happening, I think it's incumbent upon us to give the property owner a little bit of time and see if this plays out. But if it doesn't, we keep our foot on the gas and move forward. That's my position. Anyone else on the council have a thought? Councilmember Jones.
As long as progress is being made, I've got patience. And I think August timeline, thinking with today, materials, contractors, seeing that she has secured, I think that's a realistic date, and the fact that the cars are gone and that the clean out is happening this weekend, I think those are, yeah, as long as we still have our, I hate to say hammer in one hand, but we still can't put that down yet. But things are, as long as we see progress, I'm more than happy to see that she's finding a resolve to get this fixed.
Anyone else? So we're
Yes.
good with that? So I don't think we need any action. I think that's just the directive. Let's hold off on it and keep us apprised of what the progress is.
Understood.
Thank you.
Ben?
Sorry you had to wait around so long. All right, communications from the city manager, Ms. Crawford.
Thank
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just a couple of things. We have 2 neighborhood meetings scheduled for tomorrow. One is for 2687 County Road D. It's a concept plan review for the neighborhood, or the neighborhood meeting for the concept plan review. This will go to the Planning Commission on March 27th and City Council on April 11th. Also tomorrow night is the Wiper Lake Area Schools North Campus Conditional Use of Permit Amendment Neighborhood Meeting. That also will be on the Planning Commission on March 27th and City Council on April 11th. And then lastly, regarding the public safety facility renovation, construction has started. It started on Monday or yesterday. And so the existing lobby is closed for walk-in service. Use of that service entrance, will be off of 3rd Street during construction, so for the next about year and a half. Emergency response, phone and email service will not be affected by the construction. And just a general construction timeline we're looking at for phase 1 interior renovations are now through August. In May through November will be the exterior demo, site work, and the building shell. And September through August 24 will be, this September through August 24 will be the phase 2 interior renovations. And then this December through August 24 will be interior and exterior finishing and site finishing. So we do plan to have a groundbreaking ceremony as well as a ribbon cutting, but we'll do that groundbreaking later when we actually begin on the exterior. So there's something to...
You can't break the ground right now.
Exactly, right. So just wanted to publicly share that, and that's what I have for tonight.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments for the city manager? Councilmember Strand.
We doing medication pickup anymore? That was in that lobby.
Oh.
Have we moved that or?
Thank you. Thank you. That will be in our upcoming newsletter. We're not doing that currently, but there are other sites that there's a link on Ramsey County's website, but we will be providing that information on social media as well as in our upcoming newsletter.
No longer a drop-off.
Not for right now. We will be going forward once this is complete. Yes. Thank you.
With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.